Oh, I was on mute. Thank you, Sonia, for getting us started.
And so, Rosetta, will you be, should we add your email to send to Dorianne as the Warm Springs representative now, so we can make sure we don't miss you on an email?
I can forward the email of my supervisor because I'm just in supportive capacity of this work for our local tribe. I'm more of an assistant on this, but I
Okay,
could.
wonderful. That would be great. So I'm here. Julie was unable to come. Jemiah Wassam,
Here,
Alyssa Lane Keene had a conflict. Valerie Switzler. Warm Springs is being represented by Rosetta. Diane Tiemann. Michael Cherry. Angela Fasana.
Hi, I just popped on. Good
Yay!
timing. Sorry, I had a meeting run late.
That's
I'm
okay.
here.
We have quorum now.
Yay.
Jennifer Jackson. Melissa Montero. Becky Cantrell.
I'm here and Marcia will not be joining tonight.
Okay. Jory Spencer. Jamie Crane. Jesse Jackson. Jennifer Reed. We do have 5 of the 9 tribes represented, so we have quorum.
Right, awesome. Well, that's great. Hopefully, some more will be able to pop on while we go through everything. Since we're recording, I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen and we can get into it. Okay. Can everyone see my screen with the presentation?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, we have a couple things on the agenda. Some of them are follow-ups from prior months and just continuing the discussion about the roles of TAC and G2G and OTELA and funding distribution. The other item that we're bringing up is the legislative engagement, and one of the pieces that does relate to that is the 2-pager document. So we're kind of mixing things up a little bit, but it makes more sense for the flow of the conversation that way. And I realize that we don't have quite everyone here, but I am curious, when the original tribal hub legislation passed in 2021, and then there's the amendment in 2022, was anyone here involved in that process?
Like, could you be more specific, Dana? Like, were we in the process of the amendment or when the original hub?
Yeah, either the amendment or the original. Were you involved in the legislative process? Like, did anyone provide testimony, written or in person? Did you do any work in that regards?
I know Val and Modesta testified. I'm pretty sure Grand Round lobbyist was involved in maybe Umatillas. Is that right, Angela?
I'm not sure on that one. I'd have to check.
Okay.
Okay.
That but I know that there were a lot of different community members that also from some tribes gave testimony.
Yeah, I think, oh, sorry. I don't know who was talking. Okay, maybe it was just background noise. Thank you for giving that overview. Because we're going into the long session, so there's going to be some similarities to the first round when the Tribal Early Learning Hub was created in 2021. Last year, or well, I guess the amendment was in 2022, and that was a short session, so the timeline's just a little bit different. The testimony part is still the same. There's written and in person. I am also curious if anyone, maybe not this tribal hub, but other things like tribal history, shared history, or like the TAP program, was there any involvement in the legislative process from anyone that's here now? I'm just curious what the experience is, if there is any, because I want to make sure everyone's on the same page, because I don't have any experience either, if that makes anyone feel better.
I wasn't involved in the legislative part myself and or Siletz.
All right, thanks, Sonia. I guess this is good that we're here to talk about this, just because I kind of put together an overview of what to expect for the Tribal Early Learning Plan and Fund going through the process. So I have a little graphic that hopefully is helpful for those of you who are visual, just to see what to expect. So like I said, there's opportunity for providing testimony, both written and either in person or virtual. In person's preferred, but if you can't be in person, they do allow virtual. Basically, there's two houses. And so when a bill is introduced, it will go to one of the houses. And also, I should say, when I say introduced, it basically just means that the bill is going to be up for consideration for passage during the legislative session. And so, like, there's two houses, there's the House and then there's the Senate. So each bill is going to basically follow the same process in each of the houses. So there's a couple different steps in the process. Each house, the House and Senate, have their own specialized committees also. So in the beginning, like I said, the bill would be introduced because we've already put together the legislative concept and the draft language for the Tribal Early Learning Plan. It's going to be pre-session filed. That happens in December, and that basically just means that the bill will be up for consideration on the first day of the legislative session, and that's like January 18th, I want to say. I have it on another slide, so we'll get there. And then after it's introduced, it goes to the appropriate committee. For the House, this bill would go to the Early Childhood and Human Services Committee. And back in September, Sonia, Julie, and Alyssa presented about the Tribal Early Learning Plan and Fund. And so the feedback that they received from the committee was really positive. In the Senate, I think it goes to the Senate Committee on Education. And so after that, each bill has a public hearing where the committee would hear testimony on the bill, and also they'll have written testimony that they'll be able to read. And then committees will have work sessions where they vote on whether to pass a bill and if there's any amendments to it. And then at the work session, there's not testimony. It's just the vote. And then after the work session, it goes to the floor where that entire chamber votes on it. So like I said, it's a couple different things in the process, but once the bill passes through both houses, it would go to the governor, who would sign the bill, and then that's the end. And then it would take effect, hopefully, at the beginning of the following biennium. So that's going to be July 1, 2025 through June 30th, 2027. And so the bills that pass through in this upcoming session, and the budget that is appropriated is what's going to be in effect for the 25-27 biennium. So I have some more specifics over the next couple slides, but I want to pause there because that's a lot of information, and see if any questions if you have any questions about what I've gone over so far. All right, well, the next piece is a little more specific, just what legislative engagement encompasses. And so the middle set of arrows, probably the most important. Ideally, we'd have a panel of tribal advisory committee members that would be able to present testimony about the tribal early learning plan and fund to both the House and the Senate. Ideally, we'd have the TAC co-chairs and other TAC members to present. We don't know when those hearings are scheduled yet. We have some idea of the timeframes, and we'll get to that in a moment, but we'll of course keep you posted and updated when we know those hearings are going to be scheduled. And then even if you aren't able to be present for testimony, there is written as an option, and that's something that we'll also be able to help with. So written testimony could look a couple different ways. It could be like your tribe sending testimony. It could be individual people, like community members, like Sonia mentioned, for written or live. And then there's also the opportunity for a like joint letter on behalf of the tribal advisory committee. So that's something that we could work on doing. And that's kind of what the 2-pager document with the frequently asked questions could serve. It could serve that purpose. So depending on how your tribe operates, testifying to the legislature could require tribal council's permission. So Sonia's really good about talking about this piece. So I'm going to pass it over to you to explain like how that works for your tribe, and also like the different types of Sonia's perspective that you may or may not need to get approval to be able to speak about.
For testifying in front of the legislatively? Is that what you want me to speak to?
Yeah, kind of like what you've shared with us before about how if it depends on which Sonia you want. Do you want the community member or the representative speaking on behalf of the tribe? That kind of dynamic.
Oh, yes. So our tribe, as tribal, and I think it's that way for most tribes, but every time that we're asked to do something, we have to ask the organization or agency who they want to be there to testify or to provide written comment. For myself, it would be, do you want a Salem area Native representative, or do you want Sonia, the education specialist for the Siletz tribe that may or may not work with the local early learning hubs, or that, or do you want a Siletz tribal representative, a response that would be at appointment from our tribal council? So some agencies get confused by that, but they are 3 very, excuse me, separate and distinct voices that you could have. There's things that I could never talk about that represents my tribe in my personal opinion, because it wouldn't be a tribal stance on an issue. If they want someone that has had children in the Head Start program, in a Native Head Start program, and grandchildren that have been in Native Head Start programs, then I can give those personal. I would introduce myself and sign in as a local community member. I wouldn't use like my position or the tribe's name other than to say that I was enrolled there. So it is very, very different. And so if they want a tribal response, then Alyssa Lane Keene has to go in front of tribal council. And then if they want her or I to do it, then they pass it by tribal resolution that we're able to give a tribal response or testimony on an issue. So it is very different. I've had some agencies say, well, can't you just come and then just answer these questions? And it's like, no, not if you are going to put on something that is a Siletz tribal response, then no, I cannot. So it is very different. But that's what sovereignty is that each tribe gets to decide who speaks for them and what the narrative is going to be.
Thank you for giving that overview. I just wanted to kind of plant the seed in case you do need to get that level of permission to be part of the testimony, either the TAC panel, whatever we'd want to call it, or just written testimony. So whatever you need to follow process-wise within the tribe, that it's something that you can work on, since it's kind of came quick because we only have 2 more tribal advisory committee meetings before session actually starts. So it's just right around the corner. So the I'll pull up the 2-pager here in a little bit, but
Dana, I think it would be very helpful. Like, I know it's hard to know because we have all saw agency directors be on standby to testify or be called over to answer questions. But it would, I think, be helpful to know, like, if we do testify, the length of time, the amount of people, because we always want to show up in person if that's possible. But if there are tribes that can't, that if we could like start asking them to go through to provide the written testimony, because it would be nice to have all the different tribes give a voice to their work in one way or another.
okay. Yeah. Joel, do you happen to know what the number of people or a time frame for providing testimony, like X amount of minutes or anything like that? Are those, what do you know about that?
I'll have to look it up. I know that there are limits on it. I can do that while we look at other things.
Okay, yeah. But we can do some looking into that, and also we do have like a template that we could share out, if that would be easy for written testimony. So I have a slide that goes over like the timeline. So just for thinking of planning, these are some rough estimates of when things are going to be. So the first hearing in the House would probably occur in late January or sometime in February. And that's where the Tribal Advisory Committee can be there for the co-chairs and a couple extra members, like whatever mixture works for everyone's schedule, to provide live testimony and then written testimony in advance. So again, we don't know the exact date, but it should be around that time frame. Same thing for the Senate hearing. It's likely to be sometime between March and May. So as soon as we know when it will be, we'll communicate that to the group, because we know how scheduling goes. And also, just a reminder is that the Otella grant does outline that the legislative response role is one of the activities. So Otella funding covers anything that, like, if you had to pay for travel or staff time to attend these hearings, it's part of the grant. So also, like I said, for the hearings, in person is better, but if virtual needed to happen, then that can be doable. And if you can hear my dog barking in the background, I apologize. Hopefully you can't, or if you can, he's not very loud because he's definitely loud in real life. So I'm going to try and ignore him and keep going through this. So the other things about this timeline, just when session begins, which January 21st, that's the actual date. I don't know what I said earlier, but it's the 21st. And then the session ends in June. And so the Tribal Early Learning Plan and Fund would be effective once it passes and the governor signs it. So we don't know exactly when the signature part would happen, but it should be close to when session ends. And I guess what I'm wondering is, what can we do to support you? Is there anything that you need from us as TAC members for coming into this session? And is there anything that we could do to help you be prepared?
I think just, plenty of notice is the most important thing, so that we can plan.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
And I also think like regular updates. So, today the bill was introduced, or yesterday the bill was introduced, or, something like that. So we kind of can follow almost live what is happening.
Okay.
As we get closer to the hearing dates, that'll kind of help us to guide as well.
Yeah, definitely. And also curious, what is the preferred method to receive updates? Like, is email best? Do text messages, like phone calls? What would be the most preferred method?
I think emails are fine.
I agree.
Okay, awesome. That sounds good. Is there anything else that would be beneficial?
I can't think of anything.
Thank you, Sonia, for thinking. You did think of the beginning item of just advance notice, and that's important. I also see that Joel put in the chat about the citizen engagement, how to testify link, and of what the committee rules generally are, which is that the chair can set a time limit on public testimony. So it sounds like it kind of depends. But the idea is that they want to accommodate the greatest number of witnesses. So as many TAC members who would like to participate in the process, I think, would be able to. So okay, yeah, here's the 2-pager document. I know this is tiny, but I actually have the document itself, and I'll pull that up. Not that one, it's this one. Just for some context, and as a reminder, we had looked at this back few meetings ago before we were updating the legislative language that kind of derailed us from getting back to this. But the recommendations at the time were to add Otella branding, and that the focus on the document should be on tribal language and culture, because those are what the Tribal Early Learning Plan and Fund is really meant to support. And so in that, we've updated the document to include that. And put the Otella branding on it, and so I think it looks great. I'm just gonna go down to the bottom and highlight that there's also a QR code on here. I like that there's a QR code just because it makes it really easy for anybody who would like to learn more about the work and read through like the Tribal Advisory Committee's past meeting documents, for instance. And it links just to our DELC website. And if we wanted to add anything to our DELC website, we can always do that too. So this link would draw people to that. I sent this last week on Thursday, so I don't know if has anyone had the chance to review this?
I haven't.
Well, now's a good, no time like the present. Looking at it, Jemiah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I've briefly gone over this, Dana, but yeah, feel free to continue.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask how you all think it looks, if there's anything that you'd like to see changed or potentially like edits to it.
Not on my end. I didn't perceive anything that I could add or change.
Okay, awesome. And then I guess my other question would be, is something like this that goes over the background, what our request is for the tribal early learning plan and the fund, along with a series of like the frequently asked questions. Is this helpful? Like if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, Angela Fasana, what's this about the tribal early learning plan and fund? Like, would this document be helpful to navigate a conversation to explain it? And I just used Angela as an example. Like you don't have to answer, but you can if you have a thought.
I think it's helpful, especially for tribes as they've shifted programs within to give that background information and maybe just even catch them up, because I know there's been changes in several of the tribes. So I think any document that lends to that is helpful.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing we were hoping to accomplish, is that there's 3 years of work essentially that are represented and they culminate in this document. So without explaining 3 years of work to where we are now, this kind of can span that. Does this document feel like something that would work to represent the tribal advisory committees, like essentially offer the background information and be provided to the House and Senate committees about this in the upcoming session?
I couldn't answer that until I've actually reviewed it.
I can resend this too in the follow-up email after this meeting, and if it in the next meeting, maybe we could give everyone some more time to consider it, and in the meeting in December we could give a vote on whether or not to introduce it as written testimony on behalf of TAC. Does that sound like a good plan?
That'd be great, Dana. I'm taking down your questions and I'd like to read through this so I can give you a better answer.
Okay, awesome. Yeah.
I agree. Thank you, Dana.
Yeah, I'm gonna make a reminder to myself, that this will be, we can have it as a topic in the next meeting, and then also, I can just put these questions too in the follow-up email for everyone to be able to read it and have a chance to digest it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for bearing with me. So I'm gonna share something in the chat. I'm gonna pull it up here too. This is a little bit off topic, but I just had this shared with me, and so I'd asked for something like this to be created a little while back, and finally it's ready. I just think it really helps to show why a tribal early learning fund is needed. So this map right now is set to show all of the counties and the early learning hub regions across the state. And it's got the tribal lands kind of superimposed on there. And the different colors represent the percentage of children birth through 5 that are under 200% of the federal poverty line who receive services like early learning and care services, are in a preschool promise slot or Head Start, anything like that. And so the lighter the color basically represents the lower percentage of services received. And so the darker color means it's got more coverage. So there's in most of the areas, with the exception of Harney County, I would say it's close to the middle lower range in terms of receiving services. So like I said, it just shows how there is a need for this. And it's also kind of fun to look at maps. So hopefully this could be a helpful tool to utilize. It also, if you didn't know where the hub is for your region, you'd be able to find it with this tool. That did get us a little bit off topic, but any questions before I move back into the slide deck?
Thanks for sharing that, Dana. It's great to get a visual like that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks. I'm certainly, I don't know, I like maps. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily a visual person, but it is great to be able to look at something laid out like that. So we'll also be sharing it. There's still a couple more layers that we can add that will show like where 0 to 2 services specifically, or 3 to 5 services. So once those are figured out, then we'll share it internally at Delk also, because I think it will be helpful for others in the work to see it too. But I have kind of a little to-do list. This is the most simplified to-do list. Oh, sorry there we go. But between now and when the OTELA, Oregon Tribal Early Learning Alliance advisory body, exists, there's a couple pieces of work that TAC can do in the meantime. So we already kind of started the funding distribution discussion. We'll continue that. Also, looking at roles, and that will also have a couple of pieces of work within there that would be assigned to the tribal advisory committee. And then another piece that came up last meeting was just looking at reporting requirements. And so for the remainder of the TAC meetings this biennium, so between now and June, we can use the time to do things like writing the tribal early learning plan itself, if that's something that the group wants to do, or figuring out the selection process for Otella advisory, the community members, alongside the funding piece and the reporting piece. So into the funding distribution process, we did send out the funding proposal considerations, and I can give you more time to review that also, because it was just sent on Thursday, and it's totally fine if we wait until December to discuss it further. As a reminder, the question was, how would the tribal advisory committee like unspent or unwanted funds to be distributed? And so I guess my first question is, do we feel like we've had enough time to think about this and consider the questions to have a robust discussion now? Or would it be more appropriate to wait until December to discuss it? And either option is fine.
I'm for December. Again, I personally need a little more time to kind of think about how
How it would all
that
work.
might be how it could benefit all tribes. But that's just me.
Yeah. Thank you, Jemai. I mean, I know we technically have a quorum, but it feels like a really small group today. It's nice. I like being with you all, but it's definitely not as busy as it was last time we met. Just having more people.
Dana,
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw my message. We do not have quorum.
Oh, okay.
Rosetta is not a representative for Warm Springs. She put in the chat that she's with a different some different people.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for
You just wanted to put that on the record.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we don't have quorum, but we do, all the other stuff I said was true. I will also pull up that other document for considerations. This is just a screenshot of it. I will attach it to the follow-up meeting information also. If just to make it easier to find it in the email inbox, which if it's anything, if your inbox is anything like mine, I get emails all the time. So whatever can make it easier. But basically, for when we do have the discussion, we're looking at a couple of different possibilities to spend funds for the unwanted funds, I guess, or funds that tribes are unable to spend, whether that is starting at the beginning with dividing the funding based on either need or an equal distribution. I think that, well, I'm going to pause for a second. One thing that I don't think we've talked about is that the amount is a little bit different for this biennium. When we had discussed it previously, we were going off of the same amount that the Otella grants were, which was $69,000 per tribe. That was in total $626,000. Alyssa was able to confirm that the continuing amount for the next biennium for that pot of funds, which is like the guaranteed, and I say guaranteed with a pause because it's not really guaranteed until it goes through the legislative process, but that would be 665,000, which is about 73,000 per tribe. So if we also get the 4.5 million from the tribal early learning fund request, then tribes would have about $573,000 each.
So I just had a question on that, thinking about our last discussion on it, and Jemiah had brought up a good point about, there are tribes that are in the current position to be able to spend that. Would it be possible to like take that money and take the amount off that the tribes that said that they didn't want the full amount and fund them that, and then divide the amount by the remaining tribes that indicated that they could spend more?
Yeah, absolutely. That is one of the options actually. So I think that's on this page. Yeah, so option 1 and option 2, and then within each of the options there are multiple options. So within this second option, the first process option, I guess, that we could consider is that if there's tribes who either, it could work both ways, where either like after the first year of the biennium, they have unspent funds and say, we're not going to use these, or at the very beginning of the cycle, that's when it could happen. Whatever a tribe doesn't want could go back and be equally distributed amongst the other tribes. And then some potential thoughts about that is maybe not all of the other tribes want to take on extra funds, or maybe they don't want to take on over a certain amount of extra funds. So that would also need to be something that we think about, and how to navigate those specific challenges. But it could work similarly to what you're describing, Sonia.
Thank you. And that 500 potential 573, that would be for the 2 years. That would be divided between year 1 and year 2.
Yes, that's correct. And so that's even another consideration, is that the award for the 1 year, essentially, if you were to just divide it, right around 286,000. So there could be another way to go about it, where you could take the half of the biennial award and grant that out in year 1. And then at the end of year 1, we could check in and see, like, are all the tribes on track to spend, or like which tribe is still underspent, like maybe they're not going to even spend that entire 286,000 for 1 year of the biennium. Then maybe that could just be their award for the entire biennium, and the other half of what would have been allocated to them could go back into like a larger pot of funds, and be kind of like a combination of option 1 and option 2, or even something different. I also see that Val has joined us.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, Val.
Hey, I just love you guys.
It's so
Us
good that you're
too.
here. Well, thank you for hopping on. I'm really glad that you're here. It's been a while, so I appreciate hearing your voice. So since Val, I'm not sure when you hopped on, but we're just talking about what the future funding distribution would look like. There's a lot of different options and more than one way it could work. So Otella has done equal distribution in the past, and we could still do that, but we're hoping for a lot more funding than what we've received this biennium. And if we get it, it's about 573,000 per tribe. So if you've got any considerations about how to distribute the funds and like how it would work, definitely we'd love to hear from you. So not to put you on the spot, but please share if you did have anything.
I think it's wonderful news that it's going to be higher. I do like the idea of, it being split. And, if you're not on spending track, then maybe it is, it'll be what it'll be. But I'm so thankful to get back into the workspace again. And it's been a little trip, but it's, still trooping on. And so, um, you know, other than that, I'm hoping that everything will work out and that'll be, something that we could look forward to, especially for language, culture, and tradition, and making sure that our children are exposed to it.
Yes, definitely. I mean, that's when kids are the most spongy. They can really learn a lot. And I just love the work that you're doing in Warm Springs. Sorry, I'm going off topic again, but I was able to read a little bit of the draft for the Early Childhood Equity Fund evaluation. It's something that a report for Equity Fund that gets done every 2 years, and it's submitted to the legislature. And there's a part of it that's dedicated just to the Warm Springs, the tribal language component. And so it was really cool to read that and hear like some of the quotes from parents that are like the parents who don't know the language, but their kids are starting to use it at home. And or like they'll start using some of the words when they're out at the store or at the park. And it's just like really cool to hear about that and to read about the stories. So just kudos. Okay, back to talking about funding, which is not quite as fun, but it's important. So we'll have more time in December and can focus on all of the different considerations for how the funding could work next biennium. Another thing that's on the screen right now that I just wanted to mention, it's kind of it's a black hole, I guess, because the way that it could work, there's many different ways. And I feel like I've been saying that a lot, but it's true. We get to create this. So I don't want to own it. It's everyone. I'm just giving some considerations and thoughts for you to take with you. And we'll include the meeting notes and everything. So those who weren't able to attend this time can read through and get caught up to speed. But in this third option of unspent funds, it talks about holding back unspent funds for DELC administration or for granting to organizations that support tribal communities. And so I wanted to talk about that specifically just because of the way that the legislation is written. And so what we have in there right now, the way that it reads is that DELC only has a 5% set aside to contract out for professional development or technical assistance, and that we're only able to make contracts or grants to the 9 federally recognized tribes. And so in that, if funds were, a tribe couldn't spend funds, and let's say we had leftover dollars that could go to a community organization, technically it could work. It's just that with the way the language is written, those dollars would have to pass through one of the tribes. And so I don't know if that's something that tribes would be interested in doing. Obviously, well, it's not obvious, but contracting, subcontracting and subgranting are already allowed within the grants. But let's say that Siletz were to have a subgrant for Tenaya as just a nonprofit serving a mixture of Native families and children in the communities. I mean, they're not necessarily from that tribe, but the subcontract would benefit tribal people. So that is an option. I would want to know if that's something that maybe tribes are already doing with other pots of funds for other community partners, or if something like that is feasible. Or we could go the other route, which if this is something that tribes would want to do, we could have the language slightly adjusted to allow funds to go directly from DELC to community partners. But if we did that, it would require changes in the legislation, and the focus has really been on the government to government relationship between tribes and the agency DELC. So I don't know that we want to go that path, but I also don't know if tribes want to take on the responsibility of managing funds as like a pass-through. So are there any thoughts? Is that something that is happening in tribes already?
Not that I know of for sleds.
I don't think so for Grand Run either.
And my answer is the same. Dana, I'm not sure. I'd have to ask. Kind of look into that further.
Thank you all. Go ahead, Becky.
I was just gonna say, I don't think that's really practiced. I know we may have done it a couple times, but I don't think that's the norm for us either.
Thank you. Yeah, that's kind of what I would have thought in general. But it's something to think about and keep considering. And it could totally be something that just this option doesn't make any sense and is off the table. So before I move on, I didn't hear from Val.
Not that I'm aware of. I don't think it happens in Warm Springs as well.
Thank you. All right. So this is our last topic for today. So we might end up ending a little bit early unless we have a robust discussion, and that's totally fine too. So looking at the roles between the Tribal Advisory Committee and the Oregon Tribal Early Learning Alliance, which will eventually be kind of what TAC morphs into, alongside the Office of Tribal Affairs at DELC, as well as the Government to Government Education Cluster. And then there's also the Government to Government Human Services Cluster. We kind of have a matrix that will help show who does what and compare the differences between the bodies. And so we did look at something similar in April when we did our in-person work session for the TAC meeting. And so at that time, what we were looking at, which is the screenshot on the white, in the white on the left side, is what was pulled from that TAC meeting. We were working on that time defining the role of OTELA, and so we've done that. We've defined the membership, and that's what's over on the right: the purpose, the membership, and the specific services and activities of the Oregon Tribal Early Learning Alliance as it's been written into the draft legislation. So really the purpose would be to advise the Department of Early Learning and Care on the development and implementation of the Tribal Early Learning Plan and Fund. The membership is 2 voting members from each of the 9 tribes, and then at least 2 non-voting members who are either tribal educators or providers of early childhood or care or early childhood education or care programs operated by a tribe, and non-voting members from the agencies specified, which right now are DELC, the Oregon Department of Education, Department of Human Services, the Oregon Health Authority, and the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. But any other agencies can be added as requested based on the work of OTELA. So OTELA is basically meant to keep DELC on track in implementing the Tribal Early Learning Plan, and would be working with both the Office of Tribal Affairs and the Early Learning System Director, which would be Alyssa. And I'm kind of thinking, just guessing, that some of the work of this group in the future might flow up to the education cluster, similarly to the way that ODE's AIAN advisory body works. Like the Student Success Plan is a great example. The Office of Indian Education puts it together, the advisory body reviews it, and then it gets taken to the education cluster and to the tribes for review. And so it might work similarly to the OTELA group, where not only OTELA reviews it, but the Ed cluster representatives would be reviewing it, and the Health and Human Services cluster potentially also. Any thoughts or questions so far? All right, so what can the Tribal Advisory Committee do now? So looking at the potential tasks so far, we obviously know that the legislative session is coming, so there's the legislative response role, and then coming up with a selection process for advisory members. Like, that's something that Tribal Advisory Committee could work on. And like I said, this matrix kind of goes over who does what. It was included in the last PowerPoint that was sent out. We just didn't get to it in last month's meeting. But basically we have our Tribal Advisory Committee, the Oregon Tribal Early Learning Alliance, Ed Cluster, and then our Office of Tribal Affairs at DELC. Our timeline, so we're still meeting monthly between now and June. And OTELA, we don't know. It can be every other month, maybe. It sounds like that might be a good idea based on what Sonia was saying earlier, or at least maybe towards the beginning part of the school year, possibly, just based on the request for consultation. So that's a thought. The education clusters quarterly, and then our office, we're just our office, we're always here. Or the structure of each of these groups obviously is a little bit different. So the structure for the Tribal Advisory Committee, technically it reports to the Early Learning Council based on the statute that created the Tribal Advisory Committee, making recommendations on the Tribal Early Learning Hub, but it's generally a mixture of education directors and staff in early childhood program management or education programs. The Oregon Tribal Early Learning Alliance would be similar, just tribal representatives more broadly, and parents and providers, as well as state representatives who are non-voting, directing the work of DELC. So even though it wouldn't be advisory to the Early Learning Council, it's still advisory to the agency, and the agency, the governing body of the agency is the Early Learning Council. So in a roundabout way, you still would be advisory to the Early Learning Council. But yeah, the Ed cluster is a little bit different. The education cluster includes mostly education directors and education specialists. And then there's 5 education agencies, including DELC, and it can create subcommittees. So for some context, we did talk about creating a an early learning subcommittee of the Ed Cluster, but it sounds like instead the Ed Cluster might do a standing like agenda item on the tribal day about this specifically. So more discussion to come on that. Hopefully in the December Ed Cluster we'll have a clearer idea, just because there are some departments within tribes that are separated, where we'd want both to be part of the early learning discussion, where they might not all be at the same table. So that was the purpose of having a subcommittee. And if a standing agenda item on the state day of the Ed Cluster works, then we can definitely do that too. Or maybe as Otella gets formed, it isn't something that a subcommittee doesn't make sense. Maybe Otella is all that we need. So the original thought was kind of that the subcommittee would be more the body that would draft the tribal early learning plan, but it doesn't have to be. I think that everyone who's on the tribal advisory committee is aware of what the needs are in their tribes when it comes to everything education and the cultural aspects that should be included in early learning. So I think that if we could come up with a draft, that's a great solution, and we could kind of have that ready for when Otella is stood up, and then Otella could take the body that TAC has created. But I'm going to pause there because I've gone over a couple different things and I've sort of wandered. I'm just wanting to get feedback from you all of what your thoughts are.
I guess one question I have would be what criteria would TAC use to select members to testify at the legislature?
That's a good question. I mean, my inclination is to say that it would be voluntary. I mean, just whoever wants to would be able to go, as long as their tribes would sign off on them going. But that's just what comes to mind. Sonia, do you have any, I mean, I know you were around when the amendment was done. You weren't super involved, but do you remember if there was any kind of discussion about like who would be selected for that?
No, we we always recommend people, you know, like when Val and Modesta did, it was we recommended just because it, you know, they were the heart and the reason, you know, that it was created in the first place. So, but there wasn't a criteria if anyone wanted to volunteer, then there wasn't a specific criteria.
Great, thanks, Sonia.
I guess it'll be easier to really look at how it's gonna play out. There's been quite a few of us on here that have been involved, like with the updates on that ODE has went through with the student success. We know it as the American Indian Alaska Native State Plan, but now they're called student success plans. But I think it'll be a little bit easier once that we know if that goes through to look at the structure, because I think every tribe wants to be involved. It's just capacity a lot of times. It's just so difficult. And I've told many state agencies or even school districts when they're not getting a timely response that they feel is a timely response, that, you guys are all separate agencies and you respect the time of another agency when you do collaborative work. But for us, we're the same people at the table for all of those agencies, and not just agencies, but universities. Angela's board of trustees for Western Oregon. I am for PSU. I'm on local Title VI parent committee, representing my as the tribal rep there. I'm different. I mean, so it's like there's only so much time. And so I think we all want to be involved. So it's kind of hard to do this. Imagine if it gets passed. I think it's going to be, for me, easier that when it gets passed, that we can look at who is available, or I think we have a good plan even based off the consultant work that we got, that I think we already have the plan, pretty good. It's just, finalizing it and putting who does what and where into it. But I think it's just hard to say exactly what the structure is going to look like. And again, we have new people for several different tribes, and catching them up and everything. It's just hard to come up with what the specific structure is going to look like right now, is the way I feel.
Yeah, definitely. Thought I saw someone else coming off of mute.
What does OTA stand for?
Office of Tribal Affairs.
Oh,
Paulina Dory and I, yes. A mighty office of three.
and in my head, like TAC and Otella, like they wouldn't be separate. It would be morphed into one.
So it sounds like maybe the best thing to do for the near future is to really keep vetting through the topics that have been on the table. And like you said, we kind of already have a plan established of sorts in terms of what was laid out in the legislative concept of the strategies and objectives. And it can just be further expanding on what already exists there and would really kind of come to fruition when we get to July-ish. If I'm hearing you right, Sonia, does that sound correct?
I think so, just because I think that's been part of the issue with this work with Delk. I mean, not only were they a new agency, but the work in itself, and I just feel like several times the cart got put before the horse, and then we had to draw it all back down and reconstruct it, and we've done that, but we've just taken lots of one step forward, two steps back. And so I just don't want to, because I think that also has caused some people to not always come because they're not sure where we're at. And I just think it's hard until we know.
Well, it's great that you're here because of you've been a member since the beginning. I know that Val has, and I think Angela Fasana as well. And I don't know, Jemima, maybe you have too. It was before my time, so I apologize that I don't know this already, but that is absolutely true about putting the cart before the horse in how the early learning hub worked, like establishing a nonprofit and coming up with this branding, and then it didn't come to fruition. So I definitely get what you're saying. Okay, so you weren't there at the beginning. Well, then I don't feel bad for not knowing that. Thanks, Jemima. So we can continue to refine the things that we've already kind of opened the door on. But yeah, I foresee the funding distribution discussion to be something that is going to be ongoing and will probably take a good amount of time. And that's definitely important. Not to go back to funding again, but I'm going to, sorry. I did learn something about the Oregon Housing and Community Services earlier today. They came up with a funding distribution process that's different than what we've been talking about. And it's like, I'm not saying that we should explore it necessarily, but it is another potential solution where they had a high base funding and then it was based off of population. And so we could also look at something that's more complex like that in the early learning fund. But I can include that as an additional talking point in the document when I send that as follow-up. I'm probably not going to be able to make a really robust update to that until next week, just because I'm going to be taking a couple of days off. But when I return, I will definitely add that. Luckily, these are recorded, so I'll go back and review it. Well, Julie recommended having a space for tribal discussion. So we do have that for the last 5 minutes. I think the only other thing that I have to add is that next month we will have Northwest Native Chamber joining us. So they'll be here on our December 11th TAC meeting. And if you happen to have any questions about the current or next round of childcare infrastructure funding, you can bring those to our meeting on December 11th, or you're obviously welcome to reach out to Northwest Native Chamber in the meantime and just ask questions directly to them. So since Julie's not able to be here today, I'm not sure that she had any specific topic for this tribal sharing piece, but it was just an opportunity for tribes to talk about anything that they wanted to. So that's where we are.
Yeah, and I don't know how we get like word like the infrastructure grant. We heard feedback from several of the tribes that they were totally unprepared to apply for those funds because of the timelines, and even the distribution of funds. I keep saying almost every single meeting how important it is for us to know specifically, again, because of that scarcity mentality with around funding, and that to implement programming that may not be available in a year or two is very difficult for tribes. And that I learn every time from like what Angela and them are doing out there, or like, when Jemiah questions, like using it for specific things. I just think it's so important. Even the tribes that have said they could spend less, is it because of capacity, or they don't understand that, like even now I've talked to our tribe, we've thought about reopening our Eugene Head Start again because we had closed that down. and move those slots over to the Lincoln City site. So applying for that infrastructure grant to do that. I just think that sometimes I know for our tribe, we bought a lot of stuff because we didn't want to put it on infrastructure if that wasn't going to be, those funds weren't going to be consistent and available. So I just always advocate for, you know, those things that tell other tribes the possibilities of this money so that, you know, we could look at programming different and how it could benefit our communities. Because again, I learned something every time we discuss what tribes did, and I will email tribes and say, hey, what did you guys do with this? And then I take it back to my tribe and say, I think this can work, you know, for us this way, and maybe next time this could work, because we don't want to just spend money to spend money. We want it to be impactful, even though I truly believe the money was impactful. But, you know, we got into that with the ESSER funds. Like, are we just spending to spend? And then that makes it hard, because then our tribal members got used to, like for us, our literacy nights, and then the money's gone now. So I'm just a huge proponent of, you know, a space to discuss those things of how money was spent, how it could be spent, how, you know, it could go on, you know, structure. Like you could take the whole 575,000 or 73,000 and update buildings and pipes and spaces, or, you know, just those possibilities, you know. So that's my little shtick again for the opportunity, because I just think there's just so much, you know. I was, even for our tribe, I requested our Head Start federal grant, and I'm like, look, it's all right there like a roadmap. Like, but we just don't think of connecting one with the other. And so that's, I know how much it benefits me when we talk about what we've been able to do in our communities. And hopefully now, since we have so many new, Umatilla has someone new. I think Jamie's been to one meeting. Burns emails out, and honestly, I'm not sure who is in Burns, that if they're getting, because there's been lots of emails, please add this person. And I know they've hired more, so I hope we're keeping up with those emails to make sure we're getting the right people, because I know Diane has sent those emails out. And, you know, again, for other tribes that have open positions on that, you know, we're finding out if they do have someone that can be there.
Definitely.
Yeah, I appreciate your thoughts on the concept of more open dialogue amongst the tribes. I've been meaning to reach out and discuss how the tribes have been using their funding or plan to use funding for early literacy. And we have plans, but I'd also like to take a look at what was successful. You know, so we don't want to spend so much time trying to reinvent a program where there's already successful programs that have been implemented. That would be nice to hear about.
Yeah, I know we're technically over time right now, but it sounds like more space for tribal sharing is beneficial, and we could definitely use TAC meeting time for that, or we could create a separate space. Just Jemiah talking about early literacy. I know that Grand Ronde putting Angela Fasana on a pedestal here, but they've got some pretty cool things going on. Would you mind sharing a little bit about the early literacy work that you're doing?
Nope, I don't mind sharing. So I think one thing that helped us was before the literacy funds became available, the tribe had designated literacy as a focus area. So we hired a literacy specialist a year and a half ago. And basically I had her start doing assessments on our kids going into the school district and doing assessments there, doing some assessments with our early learning programs out at the tribe, and also talking to some of our GED instructors about where our literacy was for adults. So she kind of culminated all that and then came up sort of with a plan of attack, I guess. And basically, we're doing some software supports, we're doing some training. She's done a lot of work around the science of reading. So she's utilizing some tools. We're going to be training staff. We're also obviously going to be purchasing materials, books and supports, but we also know that it's not just about getting books in kids' hands. Like, that's a great step, and that was kind of all I knew to do. So we did start with some of those literacy night type things. But the science of reading was probably one of our biggest things that she's really been focused on, and just how we purchase licenses to help with our implementation and our strategies for how we're really helping kids to learn to read better. I think one thing we realized as well is that when the school districts were doing their DIBELS testing, that they were marking some of our dual language kids down. But when she sat in, she was realizing that they were saying the Chinook sounds for letters instead of the English sounds. So when she stopped and asked them Boston Wawa, then they were able to say those sounds. Like, they were too little to be code switching and know that they were doing it. And so now she's able to like deliver those DIBELS testings to our kids that figures out really how well they're doing with letter recognition, sound recognition, and all of that. So we did some pre-work that we funded on our own. So I think that set us up, but I'd be happy to share with everybody sort of what kind of resources she has identified and what we are planning to do with the funds.
That sounds great, Angela. Thanks for sharing that. I would love to get that kind of program built for CT Clusie. And we were
Absolutely. And I think that, some of please borrow. She obviously did the work and is specific to working with our kids, but I don't think our kids' struggles are any different probably than most. So you'd be able to take what you could out of it and maybe do some additional research.
That's
Great.
wonderful.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. It makes me happy to hear the things going on, especially with the littles who were, marked down, but it's really just because they're saying the Chinook sounds. So it's not that they don't know it, and that it's being identified that that's what's going on. So yeah, we'll definitely have a chance for tribal sharing in the next TAC meeting to continue these kinds of discussions. But if there's anything that we could do as the Office of Tribal Affairs to continue making space for this, or what we could do to better support the work that is going on right now in early learning or in childcare, definitely let us know your ideas. And thank you for all of the things that have been shared. Sonia, Angie, Jemiah, and I know Val hopped off, but her as well. And yeah. Becky.
I was going to say thank you all for attending and sharing your ideas, and especially for sharing some of those success stories and sharing what works so that other tribes can learn about what works and the success stories. So those are really important as well. But thank you for attending.
Yep. We are just a team in education. I just learned so much from the other tribes that really helps benefit. And so I'm really appreciative when we share space. So, and thank you, Delk. It has been the bumpiest road with Delk, but it's gonna It's gonna come, it's gonna settle down once we get the plan and everything else. I think our horse is firmly in front of our cart now.
Thanks, Sonia. I appreciate hearing that. Yeah, definitely it's going in the right direction.
It is, and the work's always been with really good intention. It's just been hard to get where we are, but I agree with Sonia. I can see the path.
Me too. I think we got a new filly.
Yes, we're a force to be reckoned with. And I just really enjoy hearing from everybody. Just always feels good to share
Well,
thoughts.
thank you,
ideas.
everyone.
Right. Appreciate everybody's time as
Have
well.
a great day.
You too.